Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to our talk. I'm Julio, and this is my colleague, Javana.
Hi.
So today we're going to talk about Chinese resultative compounds, in particular about how their resultative readings come about in 3 different Chinese varieties. So a resultative compound consists of 2 lexical verbs, which we respectively call V and R. The 2 verbs are in a cause and effect semantic relation, with V causing R. V is typically an activity, while R is always a state. For example, in 1, 打碎花瓶 means to hit the vase until it is smashed, or more exactly, to hit the vase until it enters into a smashed state. Similar examples include cry until one's eyes are swollen, dye something so that it becomes red, etc. Intuitively, a resultative compound denotes a complex telic event whose telos, or end state, is specified in R. So the overall linguistic function of a resultative compound is to express a caused change of state. It is a highly productive grammatical tool in the Chinese languages, and a ton of novel items can be coined on the fly, such as these fashionable ones: laughed tears and laughed death. The grammatical point that has motivated our study concerns the post-verbal aspectual marker le, which is conventionally called le1 or verbal le. It marks a certain kind of perfective or realizational aspect. The interesting thing here is that it shows quirky behavior after resultative compounds, at least in standard Mandarin. Let's see 2 for examples. The examples in 2 are all in the so-called completive context, which describe the state of affairs that an event has been completed. The sentence in 2a, he has bought a ticket, contains a simple verb, 买, to buy, which takes le1 normally. By contrast, in 2b, he smashed the vase. Le1 is optional, and for some speakers marginal after the resultative compound 打碎, hit, be smashed. The same is true when the resultative compound is used in a sequence of events, as in 2c, he went out after smashing the vase. The exceptional behavior of le1 after resultative compounds is both puzzling and intriguing, the more so because there's considerable variation across different Chinese varieties. And in this study, we comparatively looked into 2 further varieties of Chinese, in addition to Standard Mandarin. The 2 varieties we looked into are Dongying Mandarin and Wenzhou Wu. As we will show, in both varieties, the counterpart of le1 is strictly obligatory after ordinary resultative compounds. So here's a map, and the map shows where the 2 varieties are spoken. Dongying Mandarin is spoken in northwestern Shandong province on the Yellow River Delta, up there in the north, whereas Wenzhou Wu is spoken in the southern part of China, more particularly in southeastern Zhejiang province on the East China Sea coast. Okay. We have 3 main goals in this study. First, we will document the cross-dialectal microvariation with a certain amount of detail. Second, we will provide a formal syntactic analysis for our data. And third, we will give the microvariation a parametric modeling. All right, now I will hand over to Javana to present our cross-dialectal data.
Thanks, Julio. Now let's look at the data in detail. Both dy and wz have a positional counterpart of the SDM le1. In dy, it's leo, and in wz, there are 2 morphemes, ci, all in complementary distribution. Let's look at the sample sentences. 3a is STM. 他打碎了花瓶了. He smashed the vase. The post-VR le1 here is not obligatory. Even for some speakers, it's very left out. 3b is the dy version of he smashed the vase. Let me invite my partner to read this sentence for us.
Okay. 他打碎了花瓶了.
Thanks. As we can see, the post-VR leo is obligatory in dy. We cannot say this sentence without this leo here. In Song 2018, he argues that the leo is a telic marker in dy, different from the perfective le1 in STM. Now let's look at 3c, a sentence in wz. 互崩der Paube. The vase was broken by heating. The particles all and ba are counterparts of STM le1 and le2 respectively. and ba is optional in WZ. Notice that the basic word order in WZ is OV, so we have both so and ba in the sentence final position, but it's generally agreed that all is the WZ counterpart of the one. And unlike ba, all is obligatory here. Let's have one more group of sentences. Due to the time limit, we will not read the original sentences one by one. 4a is the STM sentence. He cried his eyes red. Again, we have an optional the one following the VR compound. In 4b, the DY version of he cried his eyes red, we have an obligatory Leo after VR compound, which is different from the previous sentence of STM. And in 4c, the WZ sentence for the eyes turned red after crying, here we use an obligatory 词 after VR compound instead of all. As we have mentioned before, we basically have two different post-VR morphemes in WZ, and they are complementary. We will show you later. Now we can see that in terms of the obligatoriness of a post-VR particle, the situation in WZ is highly similar to that in DY, while quite different from that in STM. We are going to adopt several diagnostics to further illustrate the difference between the STM pattern and the DY and WZ pattern. First, in negative completive context, we have sentences meaning he didn't smash the vase or he didn't break the vase in the three dialects. In the sentences negates the completive event. In this case, a post-VR the one in STM is forbidden, while the post-VR Leo in DY and all in WZ are still obligatory. Second, in negative imperative contexts, in which the speaker is telling the listener to do not to do something, we have the sentence, don't smash the vase or don't break the vase in the three dialects. The use of post-VR the one in STM is rather marginal. Native speakers' judgments vary. Many prefer not to have it here, while in DY and WZ, as we can see, Leo and all are still required. The third case is a negative conditional context. We have sentences like, you don't feel comfortable until you smash or break the vase, do you? It describes what would happen if certain condition were true. Again, the use of post-VR the one in STM is not so good, but the DY Leo and the WZ all are required. Besides the negative context, the irrealist sentences show a similar pattern. We can say sentence like, I guess you will probably damage your hair tomorrow when perming it. It describes an event that the speaker thinks might happen to the listener. In the three dialects, the post-VR the one in STM is forbidden, while Leo and all are still obligatory in DY and WZ. So now we arrive at an interim summary of the presence of the post-VR particles in the three dialects. That is the one in STM, Leo in DY, and O and C in WZ. As we can see from the table, DY and WZ share the same pattern, which is rather different from that in STM. Therefore, we follow Song's 2018 argument and treat WZ post-VR particles as telic markers as well. As we have mentioned before, there is still an important difference between DY and WZ. That is, in DY, the obligatory post-VR morpheme is always Leo, like hit, be smashed Leo, or cry, be red Leo. While in WZ, we have two complementary morphemes, O and C. We could only say hit, be smashed O, and cry, be red C, but not the other way around. Now let's take a closer look at the all 词 alternation in WZ. We can see that all and 词 hold fixed collocation with the R morphemes. For example, in sentences 9A and B, he got better after taking medicine, and it's raining heavier outside. We use 词 after the R morpheme 和 meaning good and the do meaning big. While in 9C and D, he stayed up so late that he got black eyes and his leg was broken in a car accident. After the R morpheme hey meaning black and the dang meaning broken, all is used instead of 词. They cannot be used interchangeably in these cases. At a first impression, it seems that positive R's take 词, while non-positive R's take all. But if we take more examples into consideration, we can see R's that take 词 involve red, good, big, etc., while R's taking all include black, bad, small, etc. Some of them cannot really be distinguished in terms of positivity, such as the color terms red and black. In fact, we find a cognitive linguistic notion salience useful here. The idea of salience serves to capture the concepts that are better qualified to attract our attention than others, according to Schmidt. For example, a long object may be more noticeable than a short one. The concept of long is thus more salient than the concept of short. Conceptual salience is often linguistically reflected as markedness. The salient concept is usually encoded as an unmarked expression, while the non-salient one is marked. The unmarked term is more likely to be used in neutral or general contexts. For instance, if we ask a general question about the length of an object, we will say, how long is it, instead of how short is it? Generally speaking, in WZ, the particle 词 is required by R morphemes that express salient concepts, while all is used with non-salient Rs. But there are exceptions. Certain R morphemes require 词 regardless of salience degree. One such group is R's expressing psychological and bodily feelings like happy and sad, etc. Another group describes weather and climate temperature, including hot and cold, etc. Now let's look at examples. Sentence 10A says, he became sad after watching the film. 词 is used after R, be said. In 10B, the weather was turned cold by his crying. Here 词 is used, but not all. By contrast, sentence 10C describes non-weather temperature change, that is, the soup turning cold. In this case, the same R morpheme code selects all instead of 词, following the more general salience-based rule. Now we can summarize the three ways of VR telicization in Chinese. In STM, a verb resultative event basically consists of event 1 expressed by V and event 2 expressed by R, and the telicization of VR can be realized by VR itself without relying on an extra morpheme. But in both DY and WZ, a telicizer X is needed. DY and WZ further differ in the choice of X, which is just Liu in DY, but either 词 or all in WZ. Moreover, 词 and all in WZ manifest complementary distribution conditioned by the semantics of R. Such idiosyncrasy reflects that XR forms a tighter relation than XV or even VR. Now let's give the floor to Julio again.
Thanks, Javina, for the nice data presentation. Now I'm going to present our theoretical analysis. Well, I guess I only have time to present the key points, but if you're interested in the details, please take a look at our paper. So our analysis consists of two main parts. The first part is on the contrast between Standard Mandarin and the other two Chinese varieties. And the second part is on the contrast between those two varieties themselves. For the first part, we basically follow Song 2018 and assume that there's a low inner aspect position between the V and the R part of a resultative compound in Dongying Mandarin and Wenzhou Wu, as in the third tree on this slide, this one. Okay. So we call it low inner aspect to distinguish it from Travis's inner aspect. Syntactically, the low inner aspect is sandwiched between the two lexical verbs V and R, so it effectively is in the extended projection of R alone. Importantly, it only scopes over R but doesn't scope over the entire resultative compound as a whole. A concomitant of this analysis is that the category of the R component differs in Standard Mandarin and the two dialects. It is a change of state in the former, but only a state in the latter. In other words, the three Chinese varieties employ different methods to build up a complex telic event. Let's take Ku Hong, cry red, for example. The overt form Hong corresponds to a complex verbal category become or go plus B in Standard Mandarin, but merely corresponds to a B category in DY and WZ. As far as we're concerned, the category of R and the method of complex event building go hand in hand with each other in Chinese. It might be interesting to further examine their entailment, relationship, and history, but we leave that task to future research. For now, we want to quickly move on to the second part of our analysis, which concerns the further contrast between Dongying Mandarin and Wenzhou Wu. The Dongying Mandarin case is pretty straightforward, where the low inner aspect head is simply spelled out as liu, as in here. However, the same functional head, I-asp, clearly still retains some lexical nature in Wenzhou Wu, as evidenced by the somewhat idiosyncratic alternation between ro and ci that we have seen. In other words, ro and ci are not totally grammaticalized, but only half grammaticalized. We adopt a theory from Song 2019 and treat ro and ci in Wenzhou Wu as root-supported heads, as is shown in this tree on the right. Long story short, in Wenzhou Wu, the I-asp category is first merged with a root in a separate workspace before it merges onto the clausal spine. So in a high granularity framework like distributed morphology, which we're basically following here, Wenzhou Wu, ro, and ci have more analyzable internal structure than Dongying Mandarin liu. While this might indicate that Wenzhou Wu is slightly more analytic than Dongying Mandarin, at least in the domain of resultative compound formation. So after presenting our syntactic analysis, in the last part of our talk, we want to very quickly present our parametric modeling of the microvariation, as well as its theoretical implication. Basically, we want to extend the well-known Borer-Chomsky conjecture a little bit and propose that cross-linguistic variation, especially microvariation, depends not only on formal features of functional heads, but also on the ways those individual functional heads are externalized or realized. There's a similar remark in Borer 2005, which suggests that the idea we're promoting here has further typological relevance beyond Chinese. Our parametric modeling builds on the parameter hierarchy approach, which we find conceptually very appealing. I see that we're pressed for time, so I'll skip this background slide and skip this one too. Okay, so this hierarchy on the right is our preliminary modeling. It may well need further improvement, of course, but the basic idea is already there. So we model the microvariation via a series of yes/no questions, which fall in a particular learning path. The way of functional head externalization becomes relevant as we move from the more macro part to the more micro level of the parameter hierarchy, as in here. Compared to the two alternatives in this gray box, the parameter hierarchy-based modeling here makes two interesting predictions. First, it predicts a typological skew among Chinese varieties regarding resultative compounds. For example, it predicts that the Standard Mandarin type here is the more common type than the DY or the WZ type. Second, the hierarchical parameterization leaves room for some further types of Chinese varieties. For example, there might also be a variety where the obligatory Le1 alternates on a purely formal feature basis, as in this branch. We will further look into these predictions in future research. To quickly wrap up our talk, in this study, we have documented and analyzed 3 ways to telicize a resultative compound in Chinese by examining 3 different varieties: Standard Mandarin, Dongying Mandarin, and Wenzhou Wu. We modeled this micro-variation by a parameter hierarchy and promoted the relevance of root syntax and high granularity theory of parametric variation. This is the end of our talk. Please let us know if you have any questions or comments. Thanks for listening, and we would also like to thank the organizers for making this fantastic conference happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.